the most cost-effective way to inhibit illegal migration and all the other illegal activity that goes on along the border, like smuggling of arms, drugs, people, is to build a good old-fashioned wall, a physical barrier.
It's sort of like government a la carte. The things that conform to their political agenda, they will enforce, and the things that don't, they will just ignore. Welcome to No Border, No Country. We're talking about the border wall today, and I'm joined by Judge Matt O'Brien. Matt, your department at the Immigration Reform Law Institute came out with a report with some previously unseen data regarding the border wall. What did you discover?
We did. So we submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to answer the question, do walls work? Because we constantly hear from certain Republicans and large members of the anti-borders contingent that, we need smart barriers on the border. We need sensors and cameras and all of these things. But the fact is, walls work, which is why people have been building them since the Great Wall of China and before. So the Border Patrol actually did an audit on instructions from the Trump administration in order to determine what would be the most effective type of barrier to have along the border. And guess what they concluded, Brian?
Wall works?
Walls work.
How about that?
So the most cost-effective way to inhibit illegal migration and all the other illegal activity that goes on along the border, like smuggling of arms, drugs, people, is to build a good old-fashioned wall, a physical barrier. And what they found is the exact type of wall that the Trump administration built, a big old concrete-filled metal wall that goes up about 25, 30 feet, is the absolute most effective. They found that the effectiveness of the wall is increased when you add technological adjuncts like cameras, pressure sensors, temperature sensors, infrared devices. And then it increases even more significantly when you have it manned by trained Border Patrol agents who know what to look for in terms of attempts to breach the wall and smuggling and things of that nature. But bottom line is, a good old-fashioned wall with nothing else reduces by a significant amount, some estimates were like 85 to 90%, the illegal passage of people and goods over the southern border.
Now, Matt, I'm confused because haven't people from the current administration told us that walls are not a serious answer and it's a waste of money? How does this work with their own agency having put out this report previously?
Well, they've simply chosen to ignore it, just like they've simply chosen to ignore the fact that walls work. They're not a simple answer, and there isn't any smarter way to delineate and control the border. I mean, the fact is, you probably live in a house that has walls. It may even have a fence around the backyard. Why do we do that? Because it's an effective way of illustrating the difference between the property that we own and that our neighbors own. It sends a clear message to people that we don't want them entering without our permission, and it's a cost-effective solution. I mean, it'd be great if this were like Star Trek and we could have some kind of a force field that looked nice and had AI that let the squirrels and the endangered deer and skunks, whatever else, across the border while keeping the smugglers out. But the fact is that we live in the real world, and the most effective way to do this is to build a barrier that goes down into the ground deep enough and up in the air high enough that it keeps people from getting under, over, or through it.
Now, how did you come into this information? Because I would imagine you just placed a call to DHS and they sent it right over. Was it something like that?
Well, you would think, and that might have actually been the case during the Trump administration. However, what we had to do was file a Freedom of Information Act request, and it took them almost 3 years to respond to that request. And then when we received it, it was redacted, and the things that were redacted from it were things about locations that they looked at and particular types of materials that they suggested for the wall. However, if you've been doing this as long as I have 3 decades working on immigration law and policy. I've worked as an immigration officer for INS and for the Department of Homeland Security. I was a trial attorney with ICE. The fact is that you can read between the lines, or the lack of lines, because when they redact these, they just come with big black blocks covering the text. So if you read between the lines, you can figure out exactly what was being said and what wasn't being said. And it was pretty straightforward that the Border Patrol found that walls work, they're an effective solution to the problem, and the situation just gets better if you are able to add Border Patrol agents and technological adjuncts to the wall. What doesn't work is having 10 or 15 agents trying to cover 250 square miles of space and guess on any given night where individuals were going to attempt to cross the border, because then you're always reactive, but the wall is proactive. The wall is a barrier that you're going to presume that 99% of people are not going to be able to get through, and then everybody working the wall can respond to the 1% that appear to get through it. If there's no barrier, then everybody who's working has to be reactively responding to anybody who crosses the line in the sand. So it's pretty straightforward, common sense kind of stuff.
Now, here at IRLI, we try to keep a close eye on what the people on the other side of this issue are saying, and we've seen some pretty ridiculous straw man arguments from the other side. They'll say, well, a wall isn't going to solve all the problems. That's why it's a waste of money. But the reality is no one is suggesting that we just build this monolithic wall and then just abandon the border and take away everything else. As you said earlier, it's the wall in concert with the personnel and the technology, right?
Sure, but the fact is, if you built the wall and just left it alone and it were deep enough and tall enough and solid enough, 85 to 95% of your problems would just go away anyways. Now, you have to watch the wall, because sooner or later somebody's going to figure out you can do what they did in Israel, and we're going to get into ultralight airplanes and fly over this, or we're going to tunnel far enough under it. But the fact is that, you don't build a prison, draw a line around it with chalk, and tell everyone you can't go past this line. Otherwise, you've escaped from the prison and you're really, really going to be in deep trouble. It doesn't work. So what do? We build 40 or 50-foot walls topped with razor wire around prisons. Now, that's trying to keep people in. What we are trying to do with the border is not keep people out. What we're trying to do is keep people who want to enter unlawfully, people who want to trespass, people who want to commit a criminal and a civil violation of U.S. immigration law by coming into the country without authorization. We're keeping those people out. But this isn't to keep migrants out or immigrants out. And the terminology gets interesting here. This stuff with the wall is very connected to the anti-borders contingent's desire to refer to people as undocumented migrants. What that does is it puts a gloss of legitimacy on people crossing the border without authorization and suggests that it's just a minor paperwork issue that can be cleared up by people obtaining documentation. Of course, that's not the case. If you come here illegally, you've broken the law, and in breaking the law, you have rendered yourself ineligible to apply for documents that would prove that you were a lawful immigrant. So there's a lot of game playing, and the fact is that an immigrant, by definition, in the Immigration and Nationality Act, is a person who has been authorized to come here and reside permanently in the United States. A non-immigrant is a person who has been admitted temporarily. The term migrant doesn't appear anywhere in the Immigration and Nationality Act, and neither does the term undocumented individual, undocumented migrant, even undocumented alien, although the term alien, which simply means foreigner in legalese, is used in the Constitution as well as the Immigration and Nationality Act.
Now, I seem to recall earlier this year, the current administration announced they were going to actually be building some wall in a small section of the border area. How do they square that with all their anti-wall rhetoric they've been saying since day one?
Well, they can't, and they didn't. What they did was they put up a red herring to deceive the public. And so in a place where they were legally mandated to build wall because the funds had already been appropriated, the materials had been acquired, and the contracts had been signed to put the wall up, and Congress was going to force them, the for lack of a better term, serious folks about the border and border security within Congress said, hey, listen, we appropriated money for this. You're legally obligated to do this, so get on it. And so rather than argue about it in the courts where they inevitably would have lost, the administration decided we're going to build this. But it's a relatively short segment of wall. I forget the exact mileage, but I mean, this wasn't like 3, 4, 5, 600 miles. It was a relatively short segment. And so they said, oh, we're going to put this up. And what that did was it allowed them to go, oh, yes, we're building the wall. We understand the importance of this, and we're complying with the relevant walls. But the fact is, it was in a segment where it's not going to have a significant amount of effect. It's not really going to do anything to keep people from coming across because they can simply walk around it where it was put up. And you know, the simple fact of the matter is that the reason that this administration does not want to put up a wall isn't because of human rights issues. It isn't because of environmental issues. It isn't because it's going to look bad to other countries. It's because they want migrants to come across the border. What they're attempting to do is they're attempting to change the political demographics of the United States so that they can fill the country with people who are dependent upon government handouts and therefore are going to respond favorably to usage of pork in legislative bills as a means of controlling people in the way they act.
So in other words, this minute part of the wall they were working on was a sort of political fig leaf to give them a talking point against accusations that they've obliterated our border security.
Yes, it was civic kabuki. It was performative, as people on the left like to say.
Now, you said before they were obligated to build with those funds. Aren't they also obligated to enforce the terms of the INA? But they don't do that, do they?
Yeah, they are. They are 100% obligated. The function of the government is, or I should say the function of the executive branch, is to enforce the laws as Congress has written them. And what has happened is that numerous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, because this is not really a partisan problem, what has happened is that successive administrations, both Republican and Democrat, and this is not a partisan issue, it's a national security issue, in order to pander to perceived political constituencies, have just selectively ignored the portions of the Immigration and Nationality Act that they don't like. Now think about this. If you were to do this in any other area of law, although it is starting to happen with drug legislation now. I mean, the fact is that marijuana is still federally illegal, but those laws are being ignored in most places. But generally speaking, with the exception of immigration and the narcotics legislation, illegal drug legislation, most people would have a fit if a presidential administration said, well, you know, that whole whaling thing, we understand that's against the environmental laws and the fisheries laws, but you know, people in Massachusetts back in the time of the long ships and the tall ships, you know, we're out hunting whales, and it was a really profitable industry, and it led to all kinds of great things. People would have a fit. They would have a complete, utter meltdown. They would be like, no, you can't do that. It's against the law. They would cite chapter and verse. On the other hand, organizations like IRLI point out to the federal government, you know, you can't do this because section, subsection, whatever of the Immigration and Nationality Act makes it abundantly clear that the government lacks the authority to do this, and they just do it anyways. And when you point out the law, they go, oh, well, you know, we don't really like that, so we're just going to ignore it.
So in other words, it's sort of like government a la carte. The things that conform to their political agenda, they will enforce, and the things that don't, they will just ignore.
Yeah, I like that. It's government a la carte, and I would take it a step further and say it's government a la carte, but what they're doing is they're putting the things on the a la carte menu that they like. Everything that they dislike is being left off. So, you know, if it's something that the anti-borders contingent sees as filet mignon, it's on there. But if it's broccoli or Brussels sprouts, it's not on the menu, even a la carte.
I'm Tom Homan. The Biden administration is reversing America's progress on immigration, reversing ICE's ability to deport criminal illegal aliens, reversing job protections for Americans, and construction of the wall. That's why I've joined IRLI, the Immigration Reform Law Institute. IRLI uses the courts to stop bad immigration policies. Join me. Support IRLI at IRLI.org. Help win the immigration fight in the courtroom. Paid for by the Immigration Reform Law Institute.
Another aspect of this that occurred to me when I read your report is that you obtained this via FOIA request, as you said. That information can be obtained by anyone, right? Any citizen could petition the government for that. Why hasn't our alleged watchdog media they could have gotten this too, right?
Sure, but the fact is that the media has become the lapdog of a particular political ideology. And that ideology is border-free world, globalist, everybody's wonderful, and they should all be able to come here. And the reason they should all be able to come here is because all of the problems everywhere else in the world have to do with American greed, evil, and rapaciousness. And it's absurd. There are some places in the media, obviously this has been covered once we release the report, that are interested in this. But the fact is that the bulk of the mainstream media is just not interested in covering this because it gets in the way of the feel-good narrative that migrants are the best thing that ever happened to the United States. They're all potential Pulitzer Prize, Congressional Medal of Honor, Nobel Prize winners who are all going to become king of the prom and have fantastic high-income jobs, or redefine art and music as we know it. And of course, we know that there are occasionally people who come here to the United States that are like that. I mean, you look at Elon Musk, who came here and set up Twitter and made a fortune. I'm not sure if he was born in the United States, but his parents were from other countries. So that does happen. But the fact is, the vast majority of the millions of people that are coming here right now are people who lack any financial resources, they lack any formal job training, they lack the ability to speak English, and they are going to be dependent upon the taxpayers of the United States to take care of them for probably 2 or 3 generations until they fully integrate into the U.S. economy.
So we've also got, investigative journalism a la carte. There are great stories like this story you got that could have been acquired by any of the corporate media, but they just choose not to pursue it.
Well, sure. And there's also narratives that get out there that even Fox News falls prey to. I was watching The Five the other night, and somebody on there said, well, what we really need to do is just have both sides get together and come up with a solution that can solve this problem because, some of these migrants are asylees and some of them have children with them. That is the biggest crock of BS in existence. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the immigration system. The only thing that is wrong with it is that the people in charge of enforcing it choose not to do so. They just ignore it at will when they think that they're going to score political points by doing it. And this is proven by the fact that Donald Trump got the most effective control over the border that anybody has had since President Eisenhower. And he started enforcing this stuff. The other side sued the living daylights out of him, and he won in almost every single case. Now, you have the mainstream media still reporting that he lost on things like the so-called Muslim ban. But here's the thing. It was never a Muslim ban, and he won a resounding victory in Trump v. Hawaii. And the Supreme Court basically said that Section 1182F of the Immigration and Nationality Act allows the president to declare a pause anytime he wants by presidential proclamation of people entering the country because he has deemed their entry not to be in the best interest of the United States. So the simple fact of the matter is that even without building a wall, although that would be a fantastic idea, with the stroke of a pen, Joe Biden could end all of this nonsense. And when Ali Mayorkas gets up and goes to hell and says we have no choice but to let these people in, he's lying. As a matter of fact, generally speaking, you can tell Ali Mayorkas is lying whenever his lips are moving.
Yes. You've said that before. That sounds familiar. Yes. Now, you said before this took 3 years for them to get you this information. Is there a scenario you can think of where the current DHS under the current leadership would put together such a study and come up with objective conclusions like this?
Sure, if they were going to do a rig study to prove that walls don't work, yeah, definitely. Then I think they might do something like that. But this was a good faith effort, and I've said this in a lot of the media coverage that I've been interviewed for. This was a good faith effort by the Trump administration to determine, okay, what is going on here? What is the best way to deal with this problem? And so they took a look at different options. They took a look at different types of walls, not just types of alternatives. And they said, okay, we have figured out a format of the wall type that will work. And we're going to look at when that is put up, what does it do? And they also looked at it in comparison to other types of barriers that had been put up, like under the Secure Fence Act. And that's the other point that I think is illustrated very well by this. This wasn't something that Donald Trump came up with. The Secure Fence Act was, I think, enacted in 1996 and then reenacted in 2006. So this has been around for a while. Now, don't quote me on the dates on that, because there has been a bunch of immigration legislation that has made reference to fences and barriers. But here's the interesting thing. People like the Clintons, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi were all in support of this when the Secure Fence Act was put in place. And they said, hey, this is what you need to do. The Secure Fence Act called for a specific type of barrier. And what happened was, and this again proves the fact that different administrations, Republican and Democrat, have just ignored the immigration laws because they didn't like them. What happened? Rather than building the fence that Congress mandated, they put up a bunch of telephone poles and strung barbed wire around them. So you had something that approximated ranch fences. Now, if cows can get past a ranch fence and escape from ranches, which happens all the time, which is why you had the Eagles writing songs about people outriding fences. That's a standard maintenance task that goes along when you own ranches. Then obviously smugglers and criminals and drug cartels and other people with nefarious intentions are going to be able to figure out ways to surmount that kind of low security barrier. And the fact is that migrants who want to come here need a pair of wire cutters in order to get past something like that. And that's only if it's, 4, 5, 6 feet high. If it's 2 or 3 feet high, like it actually was in a number of places, then they just hop over it. So the fact is that this has not been taken seriously by the U.S. government. Legislation was passed, but it was a paper tiger with no teeth. And until the Trump administration took office, nobody took a serious look at this, other than organizations like FAIR, IRLI, Center for Immigration Studies. When the Trump administration came in, it looked at this for real, and it figured the problem out.
Now, when these DHS staffers from several years ago put this together, it sounds like they were looking at raw data. What's the most efficient way? What's the most cost-efficient way? If they were to do a study on what is the worst way to run the border, wouldn't it look a lot like what we're doing right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think it'd be better to say it'd look a lot like what we're not doing, and what we're not doing right now is anything. I heard a report on the news driving into work today that they have taken federal air marshals and detailed them to act as bus drivers for these individuals that are coming to the border saying the magic A, asylum word, and being processed into the country by Ali Mayorkas and his merry band of migration minions. And you have to ask, one, why are we doing that at all? But why are we doing that especially at a time when the Biden administration has told people foreign nationals who have been unvetted, we don't know anything about them. They could be terrorists, they could be foreign military members, they could be foreign intelligence operatives. They haven't been screened at all. We're telling them, if you have a notice to appear, which is the summons to come to immigration court, letting you know that you've been subjected to deportation proceedings, you can use that as an ID to get on a plane. Now, problem number one with that is that any marginally intelligent sixth grader with access to a computer and Adobe Acrobat Professional can create a notice to appear. There's PDFs of the document out all over the internet if you know where to look. So that's problem number one, because the government has no control over whether the person that the document was issued to is actually using the document to board an airplane. But here's problem number two with that. I was an immigration judge. I was the chief of the National Security Division at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I was a trial attorney with ICE. Prior to that, I had been an immigration officer with INS. I have had a high-level security clearance for most of my career working with the government, and I'm in every single government database that you can think of. I had to be fingerprinted, drug screened, and all these other things in order to take those jobs. If I want to get on an airplane, I have to show a real ID compliant identity document. When I signed up for the Global Entry Program, I had to go to the airport in Baltimore, sit and have an interview with a CBP officer, and they had to take retinal scans and fingerprints, as well as facial recognition picture, in order to determine that I was who I said I was. So now, at the time where we have said to the highly trained, one of the longest training programs in law enforcement, federal air marshals, hey, we want you guys to go be babysitters and bus drivers while we allow all these unvetted foreign nationals who we have no idea who the heck they are and have never seen a piece of identification from them. We're going to let them onto an airplane that doesn't have an air marshal on it anymore because they're busy driving buses. And we have no idea who these people are, whether they're going to blow up an airplane, whether they're going to hijack it, whether they have other nefarious intentions. It's the most absurd anti-national security thing that I've ever seen, and I have seen some wild stuff in my multi-decade career working in the government on immigration issues.
So in closing, I think your department and you have done the country a great service, because we've been bombarded with this propaganda for years now that walls don't work. And now people hearing this all around the country, all around the world, when they hear that, they can point to your report and say, yes, they do.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's true. And I think, we put out, unfortunately, shortly thereafter, the October 7th attacks happened. But we put out a study on the walls in Israel. And the fact is, the walls in Israel were put up to deal with infiltrators. They weren't put up to deal with a full-on attack. And you know what? We cited the statistics. They reduced illegal immigration, smuggling, and penetration by single terrorists into Israel by anywhere from 85 to 99%, depending upon which wall and who was making the estimate. So this is not something that just comes up in a Trump-era report. The fact is, walls work, and people that are interested in this can take a look at the report that we put up on Israel. They can also take a look at the fact that Finland is now building a wall, and there's about 70 other walls that have gone up primarily to deal with illegal immigration all over the world in places ranging from the India-Pakistan border to South America. Hello, and thank you once again for tuning into the No Border, No Country podcast. We appreciate your support. Please stab that like button, subscribe, and if you'd like more information about us and our mission, please go to www.irli.org. And if you want to listen to No Border, No Country in your car, in your bedroom at night, on your headphones while you're jogging, we're on most major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Buzzsprout. Thank you again for watching No Border, No Country.